I want to welcome you all for taking time out of your holiday preparations to come talk about a very important topic. We are here because of the League of Women Voters. Now, I know I can see some faces here. Some of you already know, but in case you don't know, the League of Women Voters is a political, nonpartisan organization. I know that seems strange these days, but what that means is that we do not support any candidate. We do not support any party. We support the voters. And that's who we're here for today, because we have we had an important election and things have changed. And the league may not support parties, but we do support issues. When we do a study, we come to a consensus. And one of the things that we all agree on is that democracy is important. Voting is important. And your vote should matter. Your vote should be the same as your vote. One person, one vote. And that's what really is the theme behind this program. Okay. And so we have a number of distinguished panelists who are going to talk to you, because there's been a change. There was a change in our political maps, and that made a difference. And whether or not we want gerrymandered districts or not is going to be up to us. And whether or not we want our vote for president to be fair is going to be up to us, folks. And our panelists are going to explain that. But before we get to why we came, I got some league business to do. Go ahead and we're always in need of help. So that's great to have that. As you came in, you might have seen this display over there. This is your chance to vote here in the session. There's a ballot there. There's actually a QR code. Which one am I? Where are you going? Okay. All right. I need to find this. So there we go. It's not a league meeting unless I'm here to tell you to vote. There is an upcoming vote. I know there was in November, and we're here to talk about November. Nope. Nope. Stay. Okay. Wait till I'm done talking about it. So there's a primary in February, and there's a very important election in April. So now you can switch it. And we are going to have a program on that, February 6th, on the Supreme Court. Would love you all to come. It's winter, it's February, it's a webinar. We won't have you coming out in the snow. And following that, March 6th, we're going to follow that up with a webinar on responsible gun laws and policies. So we'd love to have you come and participate on that. If webinars are not your thing, fine. We've got book discussions for you. The next one is going to be on One Nation Under Guns, and there's the time, and that's where to join if you'd like to join. And there's also discussion units. So email that email program at lwvdanecounty.org if you'd like to be not just spoke to, but you would like to do some of the speaking. Join one of our discussion units. Okay, next one. There's the ballots. Whoops. Where did the ballots go? There, no, before that. No. Oh, there it is. I'm looking up there. Okay, well, oh, I see. So do put in, use the QR code if you're online. And if you're here, fill out about it. Let us know what you would like the league to follow. You can put other if there's something that's not on there. Please do. We want to hear your vote. So before you leave, put in a ballot. Next one. All right. Oh, and we want to take this occasion to make sure that we thank all of the election officials that worked so hard in November to make this a fair election. They worked really hard and they did a great job. And so we want to thank them for that. Yes. Exactly. Okay. Now we're going to switch over to the regular presentation. And you're going to be happy to know, I'm going to start talking. I'm going to give it to the real moderator of this program, Katrina Williams. She's been a lab assistant in the, she's done a lot of jobs in the Madison College. And she's done a lot with the American Health Information Management Association. She's moderated. I think you're going to be in good hands. And so I'm going to turn it over to Katrina Williams, who's going to be in charge from now on. So you're going to explain what it is we're going to ask the panelists to do.
Thank you all for your grace. And thank you for coming out this evening. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Dr. Charles Franklin, Ms. Yuseli Flores, and Ms. Deborah Cron-Miller from the League of Women Voters, who will share their subject matter expertise with us tonight. And without further ado, I'm going to start going into this PowerPoint presentation. Phyllis? Okay. First and foremost, I'd like to do the land acknowledgement statement for the League of Women Voters. The League formation began more than a century ago in 1920 with women's suffrage, but nearly 2 centuries ago, even prior to the 1848 creation of the state of Wisconsin, in 1832, treaty forced the Ho-Chunk to cede their territory of Day-Jope, 4 Lakes. Both the federal and state governments repeatedly, but unsuccessfully, sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connections across all barriers of heritage and difference. We continue this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. In Dane County, we are all standing on the stolen ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk people. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and future. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together today. LWVDC is grateful for the past, present, and future guidance of Wisconsin's Native nations. We've covered the elections. We just want to keep reminding everyone so you don't forget to vote come spring. And we've covered. Okay. And we've already also thanked our election officials. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Franklin. Okay. Also, The professor of law and public policy at Marquette Law School, where he has directed the Marquette Law School poll since 2012. The Marquette Law School poll is ranked third of the 500 pollsters nationally by the website 538.com, and the only poll with a perfect score for transparency and reporting methodology and results. Franklin was a professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 22 years before leaving to join the Marquette Law School. He is a past president of the Society for Political Methodology and an elected fellow of the Society. From 2022, that seems 2002 to 2020. Okay, he was a member of the ABC News Election Night Decision Desk. Further.
Thank you. Maybe I should be Merlin so I could age backwards, but haven't figured that one out yet. Okay. I'm going to push one of these buttons and see if it goes forward or backwards.
You're controlling this one.
I can't see it, so it's. Sorry, but. That's okay. Don't turn it so they can't see it. I'm just not getting the clicker to work. Probably because it's turned off. Let's try turning it on. That's okay. Not to worry. I got it. I got it. I got it. That was me.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. You know, in another 30 or 40 years, I'll get the hang of this. So I just wanted to start by acknowledging my collaborator, John Johnson, who's a research fellow at the Marquette Law School with me. We worked together on the Marquette poll, but John has also done tremendous analysis of redistricting since the 2020 census and the range of proposals before the redistricting for 2022, and then again, the range of proposals that we're under now. So I want to acknowledge that. You can see his links. And I did a little bit of this myself, but John bears the big congratulations for this work. So I wanted to show you the long-term trend in the makeup of the legislature. So 1885 qualifies as long-term, okay? I didn't push it back to the 1840s or 50s. But I wanted to just real quickly point this out. We have a history of being an incredibly Republican state. The Democrats in the assembly literally dropped to 1 or 2 seats at some point in the 20s and early 30s. You see the rise of the Progressive Party in there, but it was fairly short-lived and disappeared by the 1940s or in the 1940s. I want to highlight that place around, you see it sort of over 1965, a period when the assembly was really up for grabs, and it swapped back and forth during about a decade or a little more than a decade. So that was a period of high partisan competition. But then Democrats took a majority in the late 60s, early 70s. And if you just look at the blue line, you'll see that's been going down steadily now for almost 40 years. Republicans have been rising during most of that period. In the Senate, sorry, slow transitions here. In the Senate, you see a similar thing. Giant Republican majorities up until the 1940s or 50s, then a Democratic advantage. And then you also see a period in the 90s and the 2000s where the Senate was up for grabs and swapped back and forth a lot before now a growth in the Senate majority, a Republican majority, a decline for Democrats until this election. That last data point is this year's election. I wanted to just zoom in on the assembly for a shorter period of time since 1971. because it just clarifies what this long-term trend has been. And I've also put in reference points when we redistricted each time. And so the first point I want to make is districting generally is important. Gerrymandering is important, but I want to show you that it's not the whole deal here. So that if you look at that point after 1971, remember, these are the beginnings of the legislative session. So 71 is after the 1970 election. The next point when redistricting occurs is the legislature that came in 73 after the redistricting that occurred. And so you can see there that the Democratic majority dropped just a little bit and the Republican majority rose a little bit. We can't say that that's due to the change in districts as opposed to other political things that were going on in there. So it's a mix of things. But I think the main point is there wasn't a gigantic change at that point. Then look in the 1980s, the next redistricting, very little change for either party. In the 1990s, there was a shift. Democrats dropped off a bit, Republicans gained a bit. And then in the 2000s, that 2003 data point, you can see that Republicans went up and Democrats came down, but that was right on the trend line of Republican gains throughout the decade of the 90s and into the 2000s, Republican declines during that period. But then that decade of the 2000s up through the 2010 elections, leading up to the 2011 new assembly, that's the period when control of the assembly was pretty dynamic. And a big Republican majority at the beginning of the decade, then dropped off in 2006 to a bare majority and dropped off in 2008 to a Democratic majority. Sorry, I'm an elections guy, so I talk about it in terms of the election year rather than legislative guys who talk about it in terms of the year the session starts. And then the big Republican bump up that comes in 2010 under the very same districts that had flipped control of the legislature a couple of times. Then in 2011 or after 2011, you see the redistricting that happened for the 2013 legislature. Republicans actually lost a seat with that redistricting. Democrats gained one, hardly much change, but just a shade of change. But given how gerrymandered that plan was, I think you would expect, and I think a lot of people assume that that created the Republican majority. And I think this chart shows pretty clearly it didn't create the majority. It had been built there by popular votes in 2010. But what I think it did do was preserve that majority, look through the rest of the decade of the teens, and there's very little movement, certainly nothing like the kinds of change we saw in the 2000s when each party gained and lost a majority and it moved around a fair bit. So that lack of responsiveness, I think, was important. Finally, you see the redistricting, the second to the last redistricting, that's the one that the Supreme Court ordered under the so-called least change doctrine, that the minimal amount of change to the existing map should be allowed. And that actually did improve Republicans' standing a bit and hurt Democrats. Now, finally, we get the new redistricting that was in effect this time for the first time. And you see this pretty dramatic drop in Republican seats and rise of Democratic seats, though still a Republican majority. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the Senate. Broadly similar changes, but not huge changes. So this is the lineup now. Going into this election in the Assembly, it was 64 Republican, 35 Democrat. In the Senate, it was 22-11. Supermajority in the Senate, not quite a supermajority in the Assembly. The asterisk is there were two vacancies, a Democratic seat in both cases. So the 35 counts that vacancy as a Democratic seat. But post-election, Republicans lost 10 seats, Democrats gained 10 seats. And we went from a 29-seat Republican majority to a 10-seat Republican majority. In the Senate side, we went from an 11-seat Republican to a 3-seat Republican majority. So the majorities are still there. They're considerably smaller than they were. And I think the redistricting had an awful lot to do with that. Now, again, the consequences of the election were part of that, of course. But with Donald Trump winning the state by 9/10 of a point, if anything, that was working against further Democratic gains. I'm hitting the wrong button again. I'm glad I'm not blinding anybody with the laser. I'm not, am I? Sorry. These are all 99 assembly districts, ranged from the left, the most Democratic. You see a bunch of those down there that were essentially uncontested. The Democrat won by 100 percentage points. And the 3 lines in the middle mark off districts that were decided by a margin of less than 5%. So something between a 47.5 to a 52.5, or the other way around. And at the top, which I'm not quite sure I can read, Democratic closed seats were 8, I believe, and Republican closed seats are 3. 5. Okay, sorry. Again, no screen really for me. No, that's okay. This is more or less working. But you can also see in the Democratic side, there's this sort of tail coming down from the close seats. There are other Democratic seats that were pretty close, not within 5 points, but pretty close. And on the Republican side, there's a handful, 3 or 4 dots that are just to the right of the red line. And then there's kind of a jump, and there are a lot of Republican seats that are a good bit safer. That's a characteristic of this districting, that in order to make more competitive Democratic seats that Democrats could win, those Democratic seats are in general a little less safe than the Republican seats are on average. That's a necessary trade-off. If you have to carve up Democratic constituencies, they're going to have a smaller margin, and you're going to give some more safe seats to the other party. Here is the previous, well, what? I'm sorry. It just seemed to change without my doing anything. This is the 2022 margins, the ones under that least change districting that the court ordered. And you can see how few competitive seats there were. I believe that's just 1 Democratic seat and 3 close Republican seats. So one change, aside from who wins the majority or the size of that majority, is how clearly we've had far more competitive seats in this round of elections than we had before. And I will pontificate here for a moment as a political scientist. I want competitive elections. I want it to be the case that if public opinion changes, seats change with that. We saw that happen beautifully in the 2000s. When Republicans took a majority, then President Bush was in trouble, things moved against him. And in 2006 and 2008, Democrats took the majority. And then in 2010, again, with no change in districts, Republicans won a landslide. Now that had big consequences later. But the point is that, to me, is the way we want legislative elections to work, that they're responsive to changes in public opinion. And for that to happen, you have to have a significant number of very close seats, because if you give half the legislature that's 70% Republican and half the legislature 70% Democratic in votes, then no amount of reasonable vote swing is going to shift the makeup of the legislature. And that's what we had under this previous districting that we now don't have this time around. And I think it made a really genuinely big difference. This is, I'm going to just not ask you to read that. But the point here is that there were 5 districts that Harris won, but that Republicans won the assembly seat. And there was 1 district that Trump won that a Democrat won. So one of the things that fell short of a Democratic majority this time was a failure to win those assembly seats that Harris won and that you might have thought would tip Democratic, but they did not. And the one Democratic exception, the 94th up there, that's on Alaska, is a very close race as well. Now, some of this is just incumbency advantage, that incumbents, even in these new districts, are still known and people support them. And so they do a little better than their party. But over the whole election, Republican Assembly candidates consistently outperformed Donald Trump in their votes. Democrats roughly matched Harris's vote in their districts. So whether that's because Democrats chose to put all their resources or more of their resources into the races they could actually win and didn't compete in the Republican seats that were almost surely going to go Republican, even though they had candidates. I don't know what the answer is there, but there was an imbalance between Republican overperforming of Trump and Democrats about matching Harris. In some districts, they overperformed, in some, they underperformed. And that's the same thing for the Senate, but there weren't any cross-party surprises there. I wanted to quickly mention the districting plans. This is John Johnson's analysis. Under the plan submitted by Governor Evers, every one of those little things that looks like a small barcode is an individual assembly seat. And the 50th seat, the pivotal seat that would determine majority control, was 51.8% for Evers in the 2022 governor's race. But for, which remember, he won by 3.4 percentage points. Johnson won the Senate race by 1 percentage point for the Republicans, and that median seat or pivotal seat was 51.5% Republican in the Senate race. Then John ran a statistical model to predict the outcome. By that model, we saw the 50th seat as being 52.6 Republican under the Evers plan. If you look at the previous plan below, look at how much more Republican that districting was. The 50th seat was 54% Republican under the Evers vote, 57% Republican on the Johnson vote, and by our model, 58% on the modeled vote. I'll just tell you what this shows, so don't look at it. On the previous plan, Republicans were virtually guaranteed majorities under any of these election scenarios. Under the current plan, it was unclear who would win the majority. Both would have to win some of the very close races in order to put them over the majority. Now, as it happens, Republicans did that in the Assembly. In the Senate, Democrats did very well, but only half of the Senate is up. The Senate seats that are up in 2 years look pretty favorable to Democrats, but of course it depends on how that election goes. And I'm going to skip that and skip that. I want to show you this one though, because this shows how much difference there is. Look at the red dots, because that's the assembly seats that we've been talking about more than the Senate. At the very top, you see the Senate Democrats' plan for redistricting, which was a fairly good plan for, sorry. Well, okay. It's just, sorry, just slow. What I'm trying to show you here is that the dots that are further to the right are more favorable to Democrats. The dots that are further to the left are more favorable to Republicans. And if you look at the far right panel, that's under the Evers vote in 22. You see that under the Senate Democrats, the right plan, the law forward, and Evers 2024, all of those had the 50th district with a Democratic majority in that 50th district. Then as you go to the people's map, the Evers lease change, which was an early draft, will, the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, and the legislature in 22 and the legislature in 24, all four of those make that 50th seat a Republican majority. And that's what I just wanted to end with. That's how much difference you can see which districting plan you accept, ranging from a significant Democratic advantage in the 50th seat all the way to a significant Republican advantage. Same pattern with the Johnson and same pattern with the modeled. Our model said the plan leans a little more Republican than you would think it would just from the Evers or from the Senate vote. And the result is our model predicted 52 seats Republican under the current plan. Republicans ended up with that 54-seat majority. So a little bit better than what our model suggested. But districts matter. We have some more competitive seats going forward. Stay tuned for future developments.
Hi, everybody. Hello. My name is Yuseli Flores, and thank you, Dr. Franklin. I might as well quit my day job because he definitely explained everything that the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition has been working hard to do around the state, which is educating folks around the maps. So thank you again. I am from Walking or Milwaukee, and it wouldn't be a land acknowledgement if we didn't talk about also maybe the league's historical effect on Native Americans getting the right to vote. A lot of them across the entire country didn't, especially women, didn't get the right to vote in 1970. So we have to talk about our historical efforts to make sure that those folks are also included. I am currently as of December 1st, I used to be the racial equity and economic justice advocate for the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, where I wrote and tracked legislation that would affect people of color. And I would also advocate and lobby in support of racial equity and economic justice. But as of December 1st, Carlene Beshen, who is supposed to be finally retiring, who is still commenting in the chat during this presentation here today, was the organizing director for the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. I recently transitioned into her role now that she retired, quote unquote. And our goal is to, again, build a truly and fair and accountable judiciary and securing the rights of the populace to fair and equal access to voting by educating and engaging the people of Wisconsin. I'll just wait for the Prezi presentation. And I see that slide deck hasn't been updated to the one that Katrina just recently sent. So, awesome, perfect. Thank you so much for that. And then it just has to be reflective over there. Well, a little bit about me. I'm undocumented. I can't vote. So why am I sitting here at the League of Women Voters presentation? Well, because the way that you vote directly impacts the way that I live in this country. And so part of the work with the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition is also working to educate more people on the effects of gerrymandering for people that can't vote, which is the census. That is our only opportunity to be seen and be heard. So this is just the path to independent, nonpartisan redistricting. Next slide. And Dr. Franklin covered all of this. So next 5 slides. Yep. 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 I know. This was great though. Yep. Keep going. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the coalition's goals and what we've already done. Next slide. We believe, and I'm pretty sure everybody here, in that we should all reach various stakeholders and advocate for independent, nonpartisan redistricting. This coalition includes nonpartisan good government, nonprofit organizations, grassroots groups, and engaging citizens dedicated to ensure we have nonpartisan redistricting. We work in 3 different buckets: the grassroots level, the nonprofit level, and then the judicial legislative level. Nope. Our goal is that we know that something needs to happen. And although we want to get to a constitutional amendment, we know that we can't do that without hearing what people want first. So our primary objective is to empower Wisconsin voters and ensure that legislative maps will reflect the electorate's values. Next slide. Over the last 5 years, the coalition mobilized public support against gerrymandering. We led to a temporary halt. You already know that. But these efforts built the foundation for ongoing democracy and advocacy towards more permanent solutions. I have to shout out Common Cause because they released a legislative tracker asking folks that were running for office whether they supported or didn't support fair maps. And one Republican supports redistricting reform, and a lot of Democrats do. So we have our work cut out to ourselves. And my call to action to you all today is to see if your elected officials support fair maps and thank them, or they them. Next. Again, Dr. Franklin talked about this. So, but this is a really good visual because we can see that currently the Senate Republicans will have an 18 to 15 seat advantage, and the Assembly will be 54 to 45, like Dr. Franklin shared. Next slide. We know, like I said, there's levels to this, okay? We can't just, we have to get the low-hanging fruit first and then eventually wiggle the tree enough that we get more fruits. So a constitutional amendment is vital to making sure that we establish an independent redistricting commission, which means that we'll try to push for legislative change first. We have an opportunity, not only the 2024, 2025 elections that are coming up, but in 2026, we also have an opportunity to elect people that want to also balance the equilibrium, for a lack of better nonpartisan words. Next slide, please. Oh, cool. Okay. I'm going backwards. Okay. Learning curve. Everybody's learning today. So this is our strategic fair maps plan. We want to have conversations. So we are launching our campaign in 4 important districts, including Milwaukee, Dane County, and that will bring experts to talk to folks about how we decided the steps that we were going to take. We're going to include Simone Leeper, who everybody should know, and Katie Fahey from the People from Michigan. They did it, and we don't have a ballot initiative process, but we learned a lot from them, amongst other amazing people. So our goal is to have more town halls and then to also record and hear from the public. This way, through our public phases of educational efforts, we will have legislative advocacy efforts. This is not going to happen overnight. This is also not going to happen in 2026, and it's definitely not going to happen in 2028. But we have an opportunity to make the strides to making sure that by 2030, we'll have amended the Constitution. So first is the legislative effort. We are working in coalition with multiple lead teams across the state, which I hope the presentations will get shared because you can connect with folks if you aren't directly connected to them. If we want access to public education, if we want access to driver's licenses for undocumented people, in-state tuition for undocumented people, because these are the issues that affect me, we need better representatives in office. So we need all of you all to hold these elected officials accountable, to have legislative maps, because without maps, all of this could just be thrown out the door, window, roof. So the phase 3 is the constitutional amendment. So our goal is to definitely propose this. It's going to be a approach that we believe will be the best thing for Wisconsin if we start at the legislative level, because then we'll create some securities, which will lead us into a constitutional amendment. This is also what the experts suggested. So I'm just leaning with what the experts know. Can I go to the next place? Okay, community engagement and mobilization. So like I mentioned, there are grassroots groups. It's vital to our success. You are all leading this work. I'm just the face of it. If you want to stay connected, like, which one am I looking at? This is my call to action to y'all. Usually people are like, so what can we do, right? So we have opportunities for you to make this one of your pillars. Because remember, anything that you want passed won't get passed unless we have nonpartisan redistricting. Going way too fast. So please join a regional fair maps team. You are all important. I see some faces here that I see some names of up here. So We will share this information, but please connect to some of these amazing people. You can find your Senate district there. It's really important that we continue to have this conversation and hold elected officials accountable through the entirety of their terms. Because we are the ones that put them in office. By we, I mean y'all, because I can't vote. But there's key milestones, right? We already know that this is an opportunity. We're through the door already. There was already some fair legislative reform that happened, and it's going to be our priority before the 2030 census, which means that hopefully I'll have a job for the next 7 years. Other than that, I'm probably just going to retire and become a welder. Once we win, and if we don't win, I'm just going to stick around until 2040 until we will win. Anyway, that's it, folks. I'll be here till 8, but I wouldn't be me if I didn't go rogue. So if you can please go to my other presentation, and I think I have some time. I feel like I always have to apologize for Latinos, but we're not a monolith. And I just told Dr. Franklin that, like, a lot of people ask me, so what do you think now that the Latino shifted their vote and their power? Listen, we have to look at how other countries are being affected and why they vote the way that they do. I'm Mexican, I'm Latin American, but I can't speak for all of the Latin American countries and all of those Latin American populations that voted the way they did. I think it's also important to recognize that either party hasn't done much for us. And so I have to talk about the mass deportations and their impact. I'm an undocumented person. I'm a DACA recipient. DACA recipients and TPS, which is temporary protecting status folks, are at the top of the list of getting deported. Some of us are leading this work from the root of our soul because we believe in a redistricting process and we believe in balancing the equilibrium, whether that's the world's equilibrium, the quantum equilibrium, or local equilibriums. All of that matters. And so I just want us to visualize what the cost is going to be. It's ridiculous. And we might be feeling really vulnerable right now, but the cost is going to be $15 billion in just the first wave. Okay, perfect. All right, so this is just the 315 billion is just the first wave. If they do this for the next 11 years, it's about $1 trillion per year. I have to say that this has continuously happened under Obama and Biden and Trump. Like, mass deportations have happened. 3.5 million people were deported under Obama, almost 4 million under Biden. It's not new. And we're going to keep coming back because the US just needs cheap labor. This is just how our money is being used in terms of taxpayer dollars. And I pay my taxes, trust me. But this is they need to expand the prison industrial complex because they found a loophole, folks. Prison labor is some of the cheapest labor in the United States and in the world. Right now, if you're detained by ICE and you don't have the capacity to hold somebody in an ICE detention facility, they go to Dane County, where American-made furniture is made, right? Any furniture that says made in America, you might want to question where that's made. But we had a $254 billion spending, right? So I know my time is almost up, so I'm going to try to go all the way to the end. There are 4 things you can do, right? You can practice solidarity. It's more than just wearing a blue bracelet. We, as DACA recipients, influence the economy greatly. And in mass deportations, it's going to cause for the separation of families, but also for more people to rely on government need. Because if the breadwinner of the family is being taken away, then you have to rely on government need. So we keep us safe. My call to action for you, very last, is to urge your county district supervisor to pass resolution and ask that the sheriff department will not detain people based on immigration status or work with ICE. In Milwaukee, sheriff departments are their own elected offices. So as of 2019, they are not releasing information to ICE unless they have like a felony or a judicial warrant. We're not asking for sanctuary cities because then Wisconsin will lose Department of Justice money, but you can call your sheriff department and ask them for a policy change. That is it for me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Flores. And so now I'm going to introduce our final panelists. Let me actually put this back in slideshow. Perfect. Okay, so now I will have the privilege and the honor of introducing Ms. Deborah Cronmiller. She's the Executive Director for League of Women Voters Wisconsin. Before, she had worked in state government in the Department of Workforce Development and the Department of Children and Families. Ms. Cronmiller will serve as the chair of the Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition. She started her career in nonprofit management, assisting adults with disabilities, enter the workforce, and providing shelter and services to people experiencing homelessness. She is currently a director on the Community Shares of Wisconsin board. Without further ado, please take over.
Thank you so much, Katrina.
Welcome.
We can go to my, oh, thank you. All righty. As we started this evening's forum, you heard that, one person, one vote. That's the league game, and the idea is that that should be the way it is. And I'm here to tell you that's not the way it is. So, and I want to talk a little bit about how we get it to be the way it should be. Okay. I'm going to talk faster than my slides is my fear. So, okay. All right, got it. I want to remind everybody what Article 2 of the Constitution actually says. This is a state's game, essentially. There is no federal mandate for how electors are chosen. This is what happens in each state. And that's where our power is now going to become really important over the next 4 years and probably the next 8 years and into the future as we understand how government works at all the levels and not just how we've historically interpreted government actions. So let's talk a little bit about how the the Electoral College system works here in the United States. We have a number of electors who are part from the Senate, the 100 from the Senate, 435 representative electors, and 3 DC electors, giving us a total of 538 electors. And as you all probably know, in Wisconsin, we have 2 from the Senate, we have 8 from the Assembly, or Congress, excuse me, and that gives us our 10. Who wins the presidency right now is whoever gets to the 270 elector total first. And that is what is going to sit our president. The problem with that system is that this winner take all system of getting our presidents and vice presidents seated is in conflict sometimes with the reality of how the majority of voters in the United States would have chosen that said president. I think we're just going to pop ahead a little bit here. And remind you, winner take all is not in the Constitution. That's a decision that states are making now. And most states make that decision. 48 states make that decision. And then we have 2 states, Vermont and Nebraska, who've got little carve-outs that allow for a different decision to be made. But let's talk about why winner take all is not exactly in the public's best interest and in the voters' best interest. First of all, the candidate who is popularly elected in the United States might not actually end up being our president. And indeed, 5 times that has already happened. Most recently, Trump in 2016 lost the popular vote, Bush in 2000, Hayes in 1876, Harrison in 1888, and Quincy Adams in 1824. We've only had 447 elections. So this is a pretty high percentage of presidents who served not at the leisure of the people who put them there, but at the result of the Electoral College, a system, keep in mind now, the Electoral College was created, our formation, because there was no such thing as the internet. There's no such thing as a telephone. We communicated by written messages that were carried on horseback across the nation. They did have to come up with a system that was going to allow the people's voices to be heard. It worked swell 200 years ago, not working so swell today. So that's why we have to really make sure that we have change. The other problem, and there's a couple I'm going to go over tonight with the winner take all system, is that as we know here in Wisconsin, the winner take all system really puts a lot of pressure on the purple states, the battleground states, and we are one of them. And so we see advantages and disadvantages from that. But the big impact of this is that, the purple states see a lot of the candidates. The other states around the nation, the majority of the states, rarely will see them because, in fact, in this system, there is no real incentive for our candidates to talk to those states that are a sure thing one way or the other. And what do we know, because we've been doing this voting work for so long, is that when you know your vote doesn't count, guess what? You don't vote. Doesn't matter. We saw that very real outcome in this last election. Millions of voters who had previously come to cast their ballots did not come because they knew their vote didn't count. Voters in Illinois, in Massachusetts, in Colorado, in Texas, in California, tens of millions of voters did not count. When we have a 3 million vote difference, that matters. That matters huge. And that's why an organization like the League is such a perfect place to be advocating for one person, one vote. Frankly, if not us, who? We're the only organization that for 104 years has been singing the praises of the voter's voice. And this election showed us that then there's a lot of math that went into it and all of that. But at the end of the day, it came down to what the voters did. We turned out huge numbers in the state of Wisconsin. Great for us and great for those voters who really felt empowered. But if you lived in California, 4 million people sat back in this election, 4 million people who are more than the difference of the total. Think of the difference. Think of what we've done. And this voter apathy is really demonstrated. I use California as a great example. About 32% of California votes Republican. They are a very blue leaning state. This is true in Illinois and Massachusetts. The opposite is true in Texas. But what's happening under the Electoral College is those votes, that 32% of California's voters, are just completely disregarded. California's electoral votes all go for the Democrats. So all of those 32% of California's voters, millions of voters, are just basically disenfranchised because it didn't matter what their vote was. And this happens in every situation where it's voter take all. The other, or winner take all, excuse me. The other problem with winner take all is, as I mentioned before, we get special attention here in the purple states. And that is not good for the states that we can move ahead. It doesn't, thank you. That means that when it comes around to election time, states like Wisconsin in 2020 got 10 visits by presidential candidates. Michigan got 16 visits. Florida got 29 visits because they were wooing those voters because they knew they could, and they didn't have to bother with those other states because they already knew the outcome of what was going to happen in those other states. The same thing basically happened this past year. But what really has mattered to all of us, I think, is that if you're a part of those 33 other states that never see a candidate, how do you get your information about those candidates? You know, we all know we're struggling with voters, or excuse me, candidates responding to our questions for Vote 411, failing to accept our invitations to come and debate or participate in a forum. This is the reality. When candidates know it doesn't matter, they know it and they act like they know it. And who is the you know, gets the bad end of that stick is the voter. The voter just doesn't have access to the candidates. And this happens in races, whether that's a local race where the community's been consistently a blue community, a red community, you know, the voters just do not feel empowered. Only when we get to a real system of one person, one vote, do you begin to feel like you need to come to vote, because it does matter. I'm going to move ahead. All right, and then the final problem with winner take all is it creates an unequal playing field among the states. I'm going to call this the small state bias. When you look at the system that we have, the Electoral College system now, in Wyoming, a state with a population of 586 folks, and in Florida, a state with 18,900,000 votes, you know, Wyoming gets their 3, which is the least you can get in our system, and Florida gets 29. But when you think about how that weights the value of that Electoral College vote, it is very skewed toward the big state, if you will, and that really creates a bias against smaller states. If I were a small state and we're kind of a medium state, I'd be in my elected official's office every single day asking for a national popular vote, because I want to count. I want to count the same. All righty. All right. So Florida's having a lot less impact than the voters in Wyoming as a result of the Electoral College. And that's why we need to change the system. That's what our call to action is here tonight. But we have to be careful what we ask for. In order to establish a national popular vote, there's a number of ways to do this. You know, the most prevailing is, let's just get rid of the Electoral College. I caution, be careful what you ask for. There are a couple of ways to get rid of an Electoral College. And one of them, of course, would be to call a constitutional convention, which there's a lot of academic debate about, can you actually call a convention to talk about just one thing? I think most of our academics are coming down on the side of, nope, if you open that convention, we can talk about everything. We can talk about every right, everything in that Constitution. So that strikes me as a tad too risky, and we might not want to go down that road. So the League's thought on all of this is that in order to move away from the Electoral College method, we could move in steps. And the first step might be at the state level, again, where all the power lies right now. States could pass legislation that allows us to join in concert with the other states who believe we should have national popular vote and engage in a compact, like we do in the Great Lakes around maintaining the quality of our Great Lakes. But we could come in compact together with many other states, some sufficient to get us to 270 electoral votes. Once in compact legislatively, the winner of the popular vote for president, our votes would then be compelled, our electoral votes would be compelled to be cast for that winner of the national popular vote. And that ensures that we would never have the situation where we'd have another president elected who lost the national popular vote. All right. I think I went over this a little bit, but this is going to be a state's game. So in Wisconsin, as we have for years, we'll need to introduce legislation that allows Wisconsin to participate in the Interstate Compact. Dr. Franklin and I were talking earlier, this has happened every session for years and years. What happens when you have extremely gerrymandered legislatures who don't really have to be serving the will of the people? That piece of legislation never gets a public hearing. So the legislature never has to hear from their constituents about what we really want, which is our vote to count and our voice to count. So that is a big deal. So that's why we need to be working toward the national popular vote. We need to be working in concert with many other states. To date, we have, and I think this is on the next slide, but to date, we have 209 compact committed electoral college votes. So we only need 61 more. Wisconsin would be 10. There are a couple of other states that have been, like Wisconsin, experiencing some maps play, and it may put other states into play. Right now, I'm saddened to say out loud, I don't think in this upcoming session, Wisconsin is going to actually enter the Interstate Compact. But we can organizationally and individually really start the conversation, really help people understand that all those voters that sat out in 2024 perhaps would not have sat out had they felt their vote would have counted. And that's why we need to move toward the Interstate Compact status. All righty. This is just a review, but really counting every vote is so intrinsic to what is the purpose and mission of the League of Women Voters, our partners in the Voting Rights Coalition, so many in academia who really are trying to build a robust democracy, maintain that democracy. And when we don't have every person, every vote system, we're at risk. Our democracy is at risk. We're not going to get the policies we want for everyone who's residing in the United States. And we know right now, though it would be ideal to just, abolish the Electoral College by changing the Constitution, there's too many risks associated with that. So moving in small steps toward that bigger goal, helping everyone in the United States understand that they are now an empowered voice, an empowered vote, then maybe we can do something to actually get us toward a constitutional amendment through state ratification processes. Long-term, but avoids a constitutional convention. So with that, I will conclude.
If anyone has any questions, we have clipboards that have index cards on them. So if you have questions that you would like to ask the panelists, your questions.
These are ones that came in online. I'll give them to you.
Okay. So the first question that I have is for Dr. Franklin. What do you think is the most feasible way to ensure that future redistricting in Wisconsin is fair and balanced?
Two mics. Thank you. I think a nonpartisan districting commission is the sort of obvious way to do that. Iowa has had that for 2 or 3 decades, I believe. It's not perfect. It can produce maps that favor one party or the other, but it's at some level outside the hands of the legislature. We saw a bill brought by Republicans, actually, this last cycle that would do something very close to the Iowa system. Governor Evers opposed it on the grounds that it still had some fallback provisions. What happens if the commission plan is rejected 3 times? Then can the legislature just implement its own plan? That's a problem. There needs to be some kind of resolution to deadlock. And whether that's resolved by going to the Supreme Court or resolve some other mechanism, it's complicated. I don't want to undersell that. But we did come surprisingly close when Republicans thought they were going to get a much worse plan. And so they were willing to roll the dice on the nonpartisan plan. And again, I know there are these clauses in there, but let's sort of set that aside for a moment. How you get there, I think, is fundamentally a question of whether each party is so worried about how badly they could do under the alternative that they're willing to accept the nonpartisan districting system. And we came close to it this last time. Now the uncertainty on the Democrats is, what if a conservative wins the Supreme Court seat in April and could conceivably overturn the existing redistricting plan? That would be one incentive for Democrats this session to think about a change. But I don't expect that. I think it's really, we're looking for your planning horizon after the 2030 census. But it's critical to do the movement on this before we get to 2030, not wait until 2030 and say, oh my goodness, we got to make up our minds now.
For you, Celie, what is the nature of the constitutional amendment you hope to get enacted? And the second part of that would be, how do you evaluate its likelihood in a closely divided legislature?
That's a great question. Okay, we're going to be honest. We don't have all the answers right here, right now for the expectations is how we get it. We know that we need a nonpartisan redistricting commission. We know that we are going to look at states like Ohio, states that already have something established to help us create the stepping stones. But Wisconsin needs its own model. Racially, Wisconsin is very different than Ohio. So we need to make sure that the people the Iowa. But we need to make sure that people are also protected in that sense, where they also feel represented. And Deborah's the chair, so I don't know if you want to add anything else to the conversation.
I agree with all of that. And this is we need to be thoughtful in terms of how we move. And we need to make sure that as we establish our independent redistricting commission, that a commission has the authority to give us maps. Right now in the Wisconsin Constitution, which is why we need the amendment, the legislature retains that power. It is ultimately given to them in the Constitution. So this is learning curve. This is hearing from the people, what resonates with the people, and then ultimately getting to the place where we can be introducing through our existing legislature or a future legislature an amendment question that and then again in a second session. So this is, we see the path. It's not like, one simple step, but without all these steps, we won't get to a truly empowered independent commission.
Okay, so the next question, so Deborah, please keep the microphone, is regarding the national popular vote. Won't the big states like California and New York determine who wins the presidency? And if that's the case, won't voters in Wisconsin then feel like their votes no longer matter?
That's a myth. But it is, you can see how you would think that. But the reality is, when it's one person, one vote, it matters not if you're in a large state or a small state. The biases that we see in the existing Electoral College system go away. Every vote counts equally. And, we also know in the nation, why we have sure red states and sure blue states is because as a nation, we're pretty closely balanced. And there isn't an inherent bias that the big states are always giving us our presidents and the small states aren't. Who did we just see determine the presidential outcome in 24 as a mix of state sizes that gave us who was the battleground. And so there's no inherent strength of the voters in a large state. And there is, I think, an underestimated strength of the voter in primarily rural, smaller states where they maybe have been overlooked because they're going to go red. Nobody's talking to them, but they are powerful because there's many of them.
For Dr. Franklin. What happens if the legislature does not pass legislation to establish an independent commission to redistrict?
Sure. Then it would stay with the legislature and the governor making those decisions. That's what we have now. And remember, the plan we have was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. It wasn't implemented by the Supreme Court. The 2022 plan was, but then you get the situation where there can be a stalemate. The legislature passes, the governor vetoes. You're at an impasse. Eventually, those things end up in the courts. And ultimately, that usually means the state Supreme Court, though under some circumstances, it could be the federal courts and thus the US Supreme Court. So that's how that works at this point.
Thank you so much. For you, Celie, which GOP lawmaker supports fair maps?
Oh my God, I can't think of his name. In the 98th Assembly District. That's the one. So make sure you thank him.
Deborah, the next question is for you. Aren't over 30 states already on record as calling for a constitutional convention?
Yes, there are many. It is not the necessary number of states, and I think people are watching with great interest to ensure that that number doesn't get too much bigger. The harms of opening up a wider discussion about what our Constitution should say, how and what rights it would protect, is risky in an environment like we are in now and have been at certain times in our past. But we are incredibly polarized right now. We're not exactly able to be civil with one another in our conversations and dialogue. And that's really not a good place to be if you're trying to reform a constitution. And it's, in that environment, and I give it that context because, years from now, maybe I hope, 2, 3, 5 years, things are different and we're able to be a more civil culture. But I don't feel confidence that we have that now. And, going to constitutional convention to yell at one another and just end up with whoever screamed the loudest is probably not in the best interest of the people who reside in the United States.
Thank you. Dr. Franklin, what happened in Ozaukee County where Dewey Strobel, and I apologize if I mispronounced the name, lost for state senate?
Yeah, that was a consequence of the redistricting. Strobel had been a conservative assembly member, then he became a conservative always here. He's very consistent, a senator. But then in the redistricting of that Senate seat, he moved back to an assembly district in Ozaukee County because of, otherwise he was paired against another incumbent senator. So that's why he went to try to win the assembly seat. That district includes some of northern Milwaukee County and Ozaukee County, and I think maybe a shade of Washington County, but it's not much. And it is one of the areas that has been changing over the last decade or dozen years as Ozaukee has moved from very Republican to now about 55% Republican. And in individual districts, some of them are extremely competitive. So that's one where the races have been getting closer and closer. And with the slightly better districting that is in the current plan, Strobel just barely lost, but he did lose. And a new Democratic legislator will take over from there.
Usually, what would the Wisconsin constitutional amendment provide for, excuse me, besides an independent redistricting commission? What standards would be used to create districts?
I want to hear the answer to this one.
Yeah, that's again, if we do what we did in 2024 when we relied on experts to help kind of and even the courts, like keeping communities of interest alike, similar, making sure that it creates a level of competition in terms of, like, even in Milwaukee County, where it's predominantly Black and brown, create some competition there. Like I said, we don't have all the answers yet, but even just from the most recent, the experts that viewed the most recent maps and the ones that suggested the governor's maps as being as the most equal, they had some, I guess, prerequisites already there established. So for us, it's just making sure that those prerequisites are still upheld and that we keep some sort of contingency amongst communities of interest and fair representation. I don't know if Dr. Franklin has anything else to add, but it's going to be a struggle, right? And it's a multi-pronged approach, and everybody, I'm going to say everybody, even in the coalition, thinks they have the answers, right? And so we're all just looking at the elephant and touching it from different angles.
And there are a lot of pieces to that elephant. I agree. Some of them are seemingly really simple, like one person, one vote, equal size districts. But it turns out that does almost nothing to constrain how gerrymandered a map can be. Communities of interest is another. Trying to respect existing lines, like following county lines or following municipality lines. None of these end up being determinative of one optimal map. And that's really, I think, the takeaway and the challenge of, you can establish a nonpartisan commission, but then you have to let that commission somehow develop the criteria. Spelling them out in any legislation or amendment or anything always leaves the wiggle room. I used to teach a class on representation and districting. And an exercise I gave the students was a simplified state map. And they could choose to redistrict it to be a Republican advantage, a Democratic advantage, or some notion of a good government advantage. And the students could choose whichever one they want. And they all found they could achieve their goals with the population totals that they had to respect, the equal one person, one vote that they had to respect. But it was still very possible to arrange it in ways that heavily favor one or the other, or that hypothetical good government, at which point we have to define what we mean by good government. So there's a lot developing in this field, a lot of computer tools that help, but none of them solve that fundamental problem, which is the political question of what do we want to achieve with our districting? And how do we know if a map achieves those goals or fails to achieve those goals?
And I'll just add one more thing. When it comes to the census asks some pretty biased questions. So we also have to look at the national, I guess, census questions of, when I filled it out this last time, I had to pick whether I was Black or white or, Hawaiian. Like, it was really questionable, but I never got to put that I'm Mexican. Like, I never got to really get to the nitty gritty of who I really am. So it's a national issue as well. And there are organizations that are working to challenge that and to maybe improve the census moving forward. I looked at Mexico census, and for the first time, they included Native American identity. It's 2020. Like it was baffling. Yeah.
Thank you. First and foremost, I just want to say this is going to be the final question at this time. Are we going to be able to, with the other questions, like answer those and post those like on a website or something? Okay. So please stay tuned. We'll try to get some additional information. When the, and this is a general question, and I'm not sure who would like to answer this, but the question is, when will the congressional districts be redrawn?
After the 2030 census, so it'll be 2031 for the 2032 elections and the legislature that comes in 2033. Sorry if I grabbed that. It felt more forceful than I intended it to be. Now, there are no requirements that you can't redistrict between censuses, but the required redistricting is after 2030. So just as we redistricted this time through a series of court decisions and ultimately legislative and gubernatorial decisions, could come later. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to turn it back over to Marty so that she can close us out with League of Women Voter business.
Thank you all for coming tonight and listening attentively and asking such great questions. I hope you got something out of coming here tonight. We want to get some information from you. So we have that ballot up there. We want you to put in what sort of topics you would like your league to cover. Please let us know with that ballot. The online people can use the QR code to go to do one online. Remember, we have more programming coming up. To prepare for the April election, we're going to have a forum on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. That's going to be very interesting. We have another set of panelists who are going to come. So I hope you come to that webinar. And the one that follows in the next month in March about responsible gun laws and policies. So that's a topic that's a big concern. And the lively luncheon follows that. If you want to do more than just attend forums, we've got you. We've got a book discussion. The next book is going to be One Nation Under Guns to help prepare for the following webinar on gun laws. It's a really interesting book. Whether you come or not, I recommend this book. It's a great book. Following every forum, except this one because like Christmas. But otherwise, we have discussion units. So that we can talk about all these things. On the website, there is a resource guide that has a lot of things. So please do come to the discussion units. And this is the league, and I have to send you off with one plea. Please vote. Primaries in February, the spring in April. Thank you all so much for coming.